Joining us now is healthcare expert Seth Denson.
Healthcare expert Seth Denson is here to break it all down for us.
Hey everybody, welcome back. It's another Friday, and the doctor will see you now. No, not me. I'm not the doctor, obviously, but we are going to talk to what we are calling the policy doctor today, Sery Kim, here in just a moment, and I'll introduce her. But hope you are doing well. This is the end of week 5 of stay-at-home quarantine, right? And I think probably day 57 of Seth with no haircut. So we're fighting through that battle on a daily basis. But I hope that you are doing well. Where we are in North Texas today is an absolutely beautiful day, so I hope it is wherever you are as well. I'm excited about today. I have been a big fan of our guest today for a long time. I actually got to meet Sery on the set of Fox News one day, and we became fast friends, or at least I did. Hopefully she'll tell you she's a friend of mine too. But anyway, just kind of a kindred spirit and somebody who I really got along with quickly, and we've collaborated on some things. And so she spends her time between DC and Texas, and so we're excited to have her on. As always, we have multiple platforms we're on today, so feel free to type in your question. We're going to cover a lot of topics, specifically stuff out of DC. But with that, I'll bring in my guest, Sery Kim. She is a former senior Trump official. She's worked in Washington for a number of years, but she stayed close to her Texas roots, at least enough that she stayed grounded. And she is also an acting attorney, and obviously, as we kind of walk through today, there's some things that she's been doing for her clients, helping them with some of the PPP stuff. So we'll make sure we share Sery's contact information with you if you want to engage with her. But Sery, welcome to The Doctor Will See You Now.
Thanks so much for having me, and hook 'em horns.
All right, I like that too. That's right. So I forget that we have that as kind of a joint common thing as well. Big Longhorn fan. Sorry for all my A&M friends and OU fans out there. So let's talk just for a second. Just if you don't mind, give me an update. What is going on in DC? Is it absolutely nuts in DC right now?
Yeah, it's both nuts and eerily quiet. It's nuts in the sense that the federal government is actively trying to pump up $2.7 trillion in essentially 3 weeks. I mean, those type of numbers we have never seen in not just our lifetime, but in the U.S. history. And then the second part of it, Washington, D.C. is run by a very liberal Democratic mayor, and she has taken very unusually aggressive steps to make sure people don't get to leave their houses. So when you walk around DC, drive around DC, there's no one out except for the DC National Guard and a couple of people en masse. So it's very quiet on the streets, but behind the doors of government, it's very furious.
So what is obviously you've already mentioned trillion. Our federal budget, or revenues, I should say, not budget, our federal revenues are just north of $3 trillion. So here in a matter of a month, we've effectively shelled out nearly our annual revenue. As a conservative, right? Where's your head at around how much we are spending? And is this a necessary just sign of the times given where we are with the battle against coronavirus?
So I do a 3-step analysis when I look at the debt right now. I mean, first and foremost, the average deficit every year in the United States under President Obama was $1 trillion, and conservatives were appalled. Just with the coronavirus $2.7 trillion going out the door, we're now at a $4 trillion deficit. What does that say to me as a young person looking at our national debt, knowing there's no way we're ever going to pay it back? So that's the first thing that I look at. 2, was it necessary? I mean, I honestly don't know. What I know from my heart and what I see is thousands of small business owners, in the truest sense of the word. They have 1 to 9 employees, maybe they even have 20 employees. And they were told through no fault of their own, they can't pay their rent, they can't put food on their table, and they can't help their employees pay. And when I look at that situation, I say, yes, that's the point of government, is to help people during a time when through no fault of their own, they need a small interjection. And the third thing that I look at is, geez Louise, What is Harvard doing getting money? What is Shake Shack doing getting money? You know, Danny Meyer and Shake Shack is probably the most frustrating thing to me. He made $400 million when he IPO'd Shake Shack. And within a couple of days of New York City shutting down, he fired 2,000 people that work for him. He could have given each and every one of them $10,000 and still had $390 million of his own personal money left. And I think that frustration is what people feel when they look at the national debt, when they look at their friends not being able to employ people, and they think, what in the world are we going to do? So I'm in this place of conflict. Like, what do I do about this money? And I think a lot of people feel the same way.
Sure. So let's talk about money, right? Let's talk about spending. So first tranche of PPP money, $350 billion, right? I mean, it was for small businesses anyway. It was gone like that. We all knew that was going to be the case, and it certainly went faster, given that some of these larger corporations found loopholes by which that they could access it. Here's our second round, and actually right before we went live today, I got word that the president signed the second round, the bill that came out of the House earlier or yesterday. So, and that's what, near $500 billion more. A vast majority of that's supposed to go to small businesses. So a couple of questions here. One, I'm just opinion, is it enough? And then two, what are the steps that Congress is going to take now, or you know, the Treasury Department, to make sure that, again, we don't have people that getting this money that shouldn't be getting it?
Mm-hmm. So the first question, is it enough? No, it's not enough. Because right now, every door is essentially shut unless you live in essentially South Dakota. And so when you think about what will it take for small business and what will it take for people to live the life that was before Corona, there's no way 600 billion, 2.7 trillion is going to be enough, because it's not about dollars. It's the fact that human beings, 25% of our economy is no longer working. How do you subsidize 25% of the economy? So it's not enough money if you look at it through that singular lens. But the second part of your question is, what else can the United States government do about it? And I think that's where your question about the deficit was so important. At some point, there is no longer moral clarity about how we should help people. At a certain point, it's just, how can we get back to the way we were? And the only way we can go back is if we open the doors and allow businesses to function.
So you've written healthcare policy, right? You've written health policy for a number of years. You've advised the Trump administration on health policy. I've got a question I'm going to hold off for a little bit later on that. But specific to the balance between keeping our society safe from this and the unknown of this and the underlying impact of shutting down our economy that we're experiencing and the health conditions that can come with that, where does the administration strike a balance? I mean, who is Trump listening to on this? And at what point do we say, okay, we're just going to have to fight it on the streets?
You know, I think President Trump is listening to the same people that you and I listen to, the same people that everybody on this call listened to. We are taking data from every reliable source possible, and then we are weighing the health benefits of going back to work and the health detriment of not going back to work, along with the global economy. And so this is where I think when President Trump said this will be the most important decision he ever makes, and that's the only reason for that is you and I and the world is confronting fear. How do you make people in a position of fear feel better about themselves? It's all different. You know, the amount of knowledge that you had to write your book, The Cure, is not the baseline information that the average person has. I have spent 13 years in Washington, D.C. as an oversight counsel, as a presidential staffer, doing political commentary, reading government accountability reports. If you want to know who reads the budget, I'm the person that reads the budget. So my baseline of fact and knowledge is far different than my mom, who is currently living in my living room. I mean, that's just how life is. And so what we need to do as the average American is decide how much information is enough for you to work and consider whether you working and not working is good enough for people who may get sick. And this is where the media is so important. There was so much disinformation in an information-centric age that people were swooped along in fear. And now it doesn't matter how much knowledge we give to people. How do you combat fear? That's so individual.
So if you're just joining us, we're honored to have as our guest today Sery Kim, former senior Trump official, Republican strategist and attorney. She's in D.C. She splits her time between D.C. and Texas. Hopefully, Sery, you're smart and you spend the summer months in D.C. and the winter months in Texas. But as always, you know, we're live on Facebook and YouTube. So if you have a question from somebody that I would say is in the inner circle, you've got access to that today. So don't be shy. Send in your question. One of the questions that we got before this, though, Sery, is, you know, what your thoughts were on what Georgia is doing today, and maybe some of these states and these governors who are saying, all right, enough's enough. We're going to go ahead and open up.
Well, again, that addresses that fear and data issue. Georgia has a lot of fear, like every other state, but the data shows that there is less coronavirus there. And I would seriously ask people, as they look at these metrics that run down the side of your screen whenever you watch news channels, it's not the number of cases and number of deaths. There is no perspective because there is no baseline of how many people actually had coronavirus, have no symptoms, have no disease, have no illness. Right now, the mortality numbers that we have show that the death rate is between 0.2% and 3%. And while every death is important, we have to compare that with SARS and MERS and the other respiratory diseases where the death rate was at 30% and we didn't shut down the economy. So I would say that Governor Kemp looked at the data and made a decision that was appropriate for his state. In Texas, where you and I live, our governor says that we're going to get back to normal probably around mid-May and June. And I welcome that because, again, the baseline data, we don't know. But what we do know is we cannot let the economy continue to crater, run up deficit and debt so that people, based on their fear, don't work.
Excellent point. So let's talk a little tactics, because we have a lot of business owners on the call, self-employed folks, people that are trying to access PPP money. What guidance are you giving? And I'm going to ask you to paint somewhat with a broad brush because I recognize that every client is different. But what advice are you giving to the average employer or business owner saying, hey, this next wave of money is coming. Here's what you need to have prepared and ready to go?
So I will give the advice that I gave at the start, because if you haven't already put in your application, you're not going to get money. I mean, that's brutal and that's really frank, but you're just not, because this is the advice that I gave at the very beginning when the PPP money came out. And the advice that I gave, every single one of my clients got money. And here it is in 3 parts. The first part is the federal government never gives out free money to businesses. It just doesn't happen. And it's first come, first served. That was the text of the legislation. That was the text of the guidance. And so what I would say is that if you don't actually have a relationship with your banker, then you're out of luck. The second thing that I would say is that you need to be incredibly candid and honest when you put out those applications, because every single thing that you do is going to get into the media storm. I had companies with 300, 400, 499 employees just under the 500 cap say, hey, should I apply for this? And I was like, it's free money. You absolutely should, but you need to understand immense government scrutiny is coming. And then the third thing that I would say is that I'm really sorry that most people can't afford an attorney like myself, and most people don't understand where they can find good critical government information. But here's the good part. Even if you don't get PPP money, there are alternate sources of income that is coming from the federal government in twofold. One, the Economic Disaster Loan Program, which just got a $70 to $80 billion infusion, is your best bet. That is instant money from the federal government that not a lot of people applied for, and you can certainly get it in Texas. And the second thing that I would say, because we do live in the state of Texas, is that there is rent relief coming from the city of Dallas as well as from the governor of our state. And if you have not gone to the Texas Housing Authority and to the Dallas County Housing Authority on May 1st, they're giving out approximately $130 million worth of rent relief, up to $1,500 per person. And you should go there. And this is the problem. This is the ultimate problem with being a DC insider like me. And I know that will be really bad for me should I ever decide to run for office, but let's just be brutally honest. I know the system. I know how to help people get through the system. And it's really sad that this is showing you how important it is for the average American to be engaged with their member of Congress. Because if they weren't, they're out of luck.
It's the old adage, right? It's who you know, and sadly, that is the reality of life. And in business, sometimes we learn that. And obviously, I'm glad I know you, and glad we can have this conversation for our clients and friends that are joining us today. So what, with regards to the PPP, obviously this is round 2. Do you think we get to a round 3, or is that going to be contingent based on maybe when the government opens?
No, there's going to be no more PPP money. The money that was assigned to small businesses, where is this coming from? This is where, again, I feel in crises, you hit a tipping point. You make an analysis of what life was before, what you want to be in your life after, and then the morality starts to fade as to how I can help others. And then people become selfish and they're like, how do I help myself? And right now we are in this spirit, much like after 9/11, where everybody wants to help everybody. Even if we don't have a lot of money in our bank accounts, we want to eat out. We want to tip like 30-40%. We want to give extra money to church. But at a certain point, people are going to get real selfish real fast, and they're going to think, man, this might go on 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. I got to save for that 12-month period. And I think that's what's happened with the stimulus funds. Right now, you are hearing speeches from 3 very important senators, the Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, and Mike Lee. Every United States senator, by their own will, can block money. That's just how the United States Senate works. And they have said that that was it. And I believe them.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Are those members of Congress and the Senate and obviously in the Trump administration really weighing out the overall long-term healthcare impact of a shutdown economy in their decision making? And maybe you can answer that in 3 parts, right? Because we talked about three aspects of government. And I know the answer to this. I'm going to ask it anyway. But how much is politics and the 2020 election playing into maybe some of the fear tactics we're hearing from the media and maybe even certain legislatures on one side of the fence?
Yes, let's start with the last question, and then I'll do my 3-part thing that I love to do. So the last question is, it's all politics. I mean, it's not as if this mean-spirited politics or like looking at a crisis in politics was invented during the time of President Donald Trump's administration. I'm sure he'd love to take credit for transforming the media. But, back in the 17th century, the 18th century, why do you think King George gave up the American colonies and fought a war? There were media reports and cartoons lambasting him. It's not as if during the Civil War, people weren't having duels on the floor of the United States Congress. They were. So when people are just alarmed about the state of politics in America today, I was like, well, at least they're not shooting each other in the well of the United States Congress, So I would have people, when they look at politics today, just take a breath, take it down a notch, and realize it's actually a part of some kabuki theater where people will say something within the scope, like your fake news, and then they have a conversation. This is just how DC works. As it relates to healthcare, to go do my, typical 3-step analogy. So the first step that I would say is, before coronavirus, the number one healthcare issue that every smart healthcare person, which I include you in, said that loneliness and mental health was the number one issue. We always talked about mental health when there was a shooting crisis. We talk about mental health when we look at the fact that old people in retirement homes are getting more diseases. It's because they don't have anybody to talk to. And I'm so blessed and lucky that I have Mike, my boyfriend, during this quarantine, and I have my mom, as crazy as she drives me during this quarantine. I have people who love me and care for me. Well, what about all these people who don't? What is happening to their mental health? And this lockdown issue is fundamentally not talking about that. And we are going to have serious ramifications if people with mental health aren't addressed. And I think it's hilarious that the governor of New Jersey said that he had to keep open liquor stores because he was worried about mental health, but he wouldn't let people go to church. I mean, come on. So the second thing that I would say is that, as we know, when we heard the revenue call from Mayo Clinic, a $5 billion clinic that works on phenomenal diseases, they lost $4 billion in revenue because they weren't allowed to do these elective surgeries and focus on anything but COVID. You yourself wrote in your book, The Cure, about con laws and how we aren't allowed to have hospitals in certain regions because they need to show certificate of need. However, in density tight cities like Dallas and New York City, the reason why there aren't enough hospitals is because of those very laws that government put into effect. Right now, we have a government that doesn't understand healthcare. They'll never understand healthcare. And so I think what coronavirus has shown us is either we need to put doctors in charge of our laws, or we need to have elected officials get out of doctors' way. And the third thing that I would say is that historically, pandemics happen. They don't just happen in 1917. In 1968, we had a virus, the Wuhan virus. It killed 1 million people. And that was just in 1968. We are always going to have severe healthcare issues, but we have never, ever shut our global economy. And I would ask every person who's afraid right now, what is worse? The idea that you might get an infectious disease that causes you to have a cold, or whether every single person living in your neighborhood can't work for the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think there's certainly those are the questions that are being asked, right? At what point is the, I think even the president said this, right? The cure worse than the disease itself. And I think this is the question that a lot of us are wrestling with. I wrestle with this with parents who are still, I consider, young but getting older, with friends that may have a compromised immune system, with young children. Right. And Jen and I have this conversation all the time of what would happen if both of us, God help it if it would be her, because my kids would be in a dire strait with me trying to be teacher, dad, mom, everything. But what happens if one of us had to go offline because we caught this, and even though we're in a health situation where we probably would recover, to just have to be quarantined for 14 days and leave the other with managing the household, that would be a challenge. And I think that's a lot of the questions that people are asking. But at the end of the day, to what you said, and I'm going to shift gears and let's talk healthcare for a second. Obviously, you and I both work in the healthcare space in an advisory capacity. I've talked to a number of doctors. My personal doctor had to literally lay off 100 employees as his primary care practice because he can't see patients, and he didn't get PPP money in time because Shake Shack got it. And obviously, but these are the challenges. And when the CDC came out and said, only elective procedures are not, a lot of us, I think, thought elective procedure, we're thinking cosmetic. Elective procedure, as guided by the CDC, was effectively anything that wasn't a life-saving measure. So, from that perspective, the second round of PPP money has, $75 billion set aside for healthcare. It's a drip in the bucket, right?
That's right. It is. And I would say that the most important thing that Washington, D.C. and state government officials right now can do is just get out of the way. Let people make their own moral decisions. If you feel as if you're going to be sick, then you can choose to stay at home. But if you stay at home and have a cushy white collar job that pays you anything more than 90,000 a year, how can you justify not letting somebody who makes 60,000 a year, let's say at a call center, not go to work? Are you going to subsidize that person for the rest of your life? Absolutely not. And I would say one step further, we have decided what is an essential worker and a non-essential worker. But what we have seen as a result of this crisis is the ultimate non-essential worker is Congress. How is it that our legislative officials are not in Washington, D.C., fixing all the problems that are broken? Why aren't they fixing the unemployment system that hasn't been fixed since 1960? Why aren't they figuring out what healthcare regulations are onerous, like those con halls, preventing hospitals from being built? Why aren't they back in Washington, D.C. trying to figure out how we pay off this deficit? Why aren't they in Washington, D.C. trying to figure out where all the PPEs are? Why are they sitting at home eating ice cream out of their $40,000 refrigerators like Nancy Pelosi? If you don't want to work, I will happily take your job, Nancy Pelosi.
I love it. I love it. Can we talk China, or is that off limits?
Favorite topic. Go. The only topic that is off topic is how you cannot live without Jenna decorating your house to Look at that background.
I know,
what would
right?
you do without Jenna decorating for you? I just don't know.
Well, it would, listen, it wouldn't look this good. I assure you of that, and I'll make sure to pass that along. She'll appreciate that. Way out punting my coverage. I always say that. All right. All right. So China. It was announced this week. I guess it was the state of Missouri is suing China. Is that right? Over this whole thing. So I've got a two-part question here. One, does that go anywhere? Right. At the end of the day, does that lawsuit have any merit? Does it go anywhere? And two, are they to blame? Is China to blame? And is the world going to hold them accountable in any way?
So. Country just doesn't go anywhere, but it certainly makes people feel better. And I'm sure it's going to help the governor and every elected official in Missouri help win their races because they're showing that they're strong to China. But let's be real. China has been our banker. China has been our manufacturer. China has been the country that makes our iPhones that we don't want to see, only making $1 a day so that we can have these beautiful phones in our hands. I mean, China has been essentially the ignored child in the corner. But as we ignore them, they have eaten our lunch. We forget that while the United States is still #1 overall in manufacturing, China is only behind us by 10%. That is nothing. Somehow in 20 years, they went from impoverished farmers to now one of the, and some would say, the second largest global superpower and the superpower in waiting. That's a real problem. So as it relates to your second question, are they going to be held accountable? No way. They are not going to be held accountable. We right now are facing the fact that the mainstream media refuses to acknowledge that it came from China. So China's not even really being blamed for it. Two, China, as our manufacturer, has 90% of our active pharmaceutical ingredients, 50% of all PPE devices, and they certainly have a lot of the products to ship to your house when you need Amazon Prime. There's no way they're going to be held accountable. And three, as we continue to run up deficits and potentially devalue the United States dollar, who do you think holds our debt and deficit? Who do you think has the trillions of dollars of U.S. securities that were put into the market to pay for all those liberal policies that we have been pushing out? Who do you think paid for Obamacare? China did. So are we really going to be mad at our banker now? No way.
So, and you brought up something in there I want to touch base on, because this has been a hot button of mine. You and I have had this conversation a number of times. How many of our APIs, those are active pharmaceutical ingredients, and obviously you mentioned PPP as well, or PPE as well, come from China. And that at the end of the day, I see this as a national security issue, that if China really wanted to attack us without firing a shot, it would effectively be, you're not getting any more medicine. Are we going to wake up to that? Is Congress going to wake up to that? Is the administration going to wake up to that? Are we going to do anything about it? And if so, what and how and when?
So this is where people say they have no power in DC. I tell them, you have all the power. Look how quickly Shake Shack and Harvard had to give back that money. People were incensed. People were so upset. This is where every American who spends a single penny of their dollars need to ask these corporations in the United States, where are you getting and how are you making the things that are coming into my house? If Procter & Gamble is making all their Tide laundry detergent in China, maybe you should buy some products here in the United States. And Procter & Gamble does it, by the way. I'm just using them as an example, but like, I love my dress. I think it's really pretty, and it's made 100% here in the United States. But I could have gotten it 70% cheaper from a Chinese manufacturer off of Amazon. But I'm voting with my dollars, and every American needs to as well. If you feel an ounce of conscience right now about what China is doing and how they have hid the ramifications of this particular virus on not just your health, but in your economy, stop buying products made in China.
That's a great point. So let's talk health policy. Right, you've been heavily involved in the administration, in the past administrations, maybe not the Obama administration, in writing the Affordable Care Act. But what is the administration ever going to release a health care plan? And are they going to face this head on? Because we have an election coming, and not to get political, but Democrats win when it comes to health care because they've actually released something. Is the president going to do the same?
So the Trump administration would say that they've already released a plan and it failed, which is true. So the question now is you have to redefine what that word means. As you know, when you ask any of your employees, what does healthcare mean to you? They're like, well, I have health insurance. But and I know, and you certainly wrote about it in your book, that's not healthcare. Healthcare is being able to go to any doctor that you want, get your services treated, have it be cheap and affordable, and then go back home and not worry about being bankrupt. That is the cycle of healthcare. But you get somebody in any part of that cycle, and that will be their definition of what healthcare means to them. And I think the only thing the Trump administration has failed to do is they have failed to redefine what healthcare means, and they have failed to fight back on the fact that Obamacare didn't give anybody healthcare. They just told you if you buy insurance, you might potentially be able to get some healthcare services. And that's a lie. That is a flat out lie. We have seen in rural America, doctors don't want to practice there anymore. We have seen in inner city Detroit, hospitals can't afford to build buildings there anymore. And we have certainly seen with our friends who are nurses that they're not being paid enough to become nurses. So they choose another profession altogether. Everything is healthcare. But until you and I and the voter make politicians define what healthcare actually means, it's just not going to change.
That's a great point. So as we're wrapping up today, I got to ask I got to go into politics just a little bit, just out of curiosity, because you're in rooms that I only dream of being in sometimes, and sometimes glad I'm not. Let's be real. What do you see in the upcoming election? Are we ever going to get back to debating? Are Trump and Biden going to get to go at it on stage? What are you thinking comes down the pike?
Oh my gosh, must watch television, right? I mean, this is where the Biden folks are in such a disadvantage. Far with these reporters. And it was so funny what the president said yesterday when talking about Joe Biden. He said, oh yeah, that guy in the basement, he's so able to take a phrase, impute it on an opponent, and go from there. And I would say that the Biden campaign certainly doesn't want to debate the president because he seems to not even remember who his wife is, let alone who his sister is. Joe Biden, bless your heart. Honestly, I don't know, Seth. I really wish we could go back to normal and the conventions will go forward in August. I really hope that we can go back to just talking about politics. I mean, the most normal thing that we have seen in the last 5 weeks is that the NFL commissioner was booed yesterday, during the NFL draft. I mean, thank goodness Roger Goodell booed. The world is normal. But other than that, it'll be hard to see. And Jerry Jones did the draft on his $250 million yacht. Man, I wish Jerry Jones would give me that yacht. That would be amazing.
Oh, goodness. If people want to get in touch with you, they need to retain your services to help them navigate the second round of funding with PPP, maybe have their message taken to Washington and put on the desk of people who can actually make things happen. How do they find you?
I would love for them to contact me at my personal email, sery@serykim.com. That's just Sery@serykim.com. And I will do my very best to help. And, sometimes in this moment, it just helps to talk to somebody to give you facts and details based upon experience. I'm not necessarily sure, like as I said earlier in the podcast, that they're going to get any money because I think that second tranche is gone. But there are alternate sources of funding in the federal government.
Excellent. That's good to know. I know that your time is extremely valuable. I appreciate you just giving us some insights into your thoughts, your opinions, and maybe what you're hearing in DC and your expertise. So thank you for the time today.
Oh, thank you so much. And definitely pass along our compliments to Jenna.
Oh, I will. And as always, a big thanks to everybody at GDP Advisors for helping make this happen, to Andrew Clark, who puts this on, to our clients who help support us in all that we're trying to do. Thank you. Tune in next week. We're working on it. Probably going to have Dr. Rankins back to give us a healthcare update on the Doctor Will See You Now. I appreciated Sery being here to talk about the policies, the policy doctor. For everyone at GDP, we appreciate you, and thanks for tuning in. We look forward to talking with you again soon.